Slayers are one of the most important aspects of Hypixel Skyblock. They can drop items worth hundreds of millions, give large amounts of combat XP, and also level up your Skyblock level over 40 times if you max them all out. But to the average player, this task is quite daunting, and can take hundreds of hours if you don't have experience. That's why today, I'll be teaching you how to get the max level of each Slayer as fast as possible. Before the video starts, note that I will not be covering Blaze Slayer in this video as I don't have enough experience to teach you how to do it effectively. Also, be sure to subscribe. One more thing I want to go over is the gear you will need before you can start thinking about doing Slayers efficiently. If you don't meet some of the requirements, there is a progression guide on my channel that tells you how to quickly get good gear, and I will link that video in the description. The first thing we'll go over is armor. You'll want either a damage or magic find setup. Use a damage setup if you struggle to kill bosses, and a magic find setup if you're more confident and are looking for rare drops. For damage, I would recommend at least base Crimson armor, but either Necron or higher tiers of Crimson are better. You can swap the helmet for either a Tarantula helmet for cheap damage, or a Warden helmet that is a bit more expensive but deals a lot more damage. Reforge all pieces to Ancient. For magic find, Sorrow armor is incredibly cheap, but the combat stats are terrible, so only use this if you have decent magical power and a good weapon. You could also use Crimson armor with the magic find attributes for some magic find, but getting this attribute to high levels costs hundreds of millions of coins and requires an Infernal Kudra completion, and Sorrow gives just as much magic find as level 10 of the attribute. You can swap the helmet for a Crown of Avaris, but a maximum will cost upwards of 1.5 billion. A Clover helmet can give the most magic find of anything in the game, but it costs over 15 billion coins, so most players couldn't even afford this if they sold everything they own. For pets, a Griffin pet gives a balance of some magic find and some damage, but is slightly expensive. A Black cat gives good magic find and buffs the Warden helmet ability by a little bit, because it raises your speed cap to 500, but this pet is also a little pricey. A Golden dragon gives the best damage and magic find of any pet in the game, but requires about 2.2 billion coins for max one. If you don't have the money for any of these, a tiger works just fine for DPS. A wolf pet or a respective Slayer pet can also be nice to spawn the boss, and I would recommend at least getting a wolf pet if you plan on getting max or even just high level Slayers. Equipment doesn't make too much of a difference in damage, but the Molten set can give magic find and okay damage, but it's also a little bit expensive. You will need at least 500 magical power to make Slayers worth it, and as you progress to more difficult bosses, you should have around 1000. It also, obviously, is faster to do any boss when Aatrox is Mare, so if you just want to get Slayers over with, do them during Aatrox. I will be covering 5 Slayers in this video, the first and easiest of which being Zombie. Zombie Slayer is one of the easiest Slayers to max because there is a tier 5 variant of the boss, which gives 3 times as much Slayer XP as tier 4. The boss takes magic damage up to tier 4, but the tier 5 version does not. If you don't have enough money, I would recommend just getting a Revenant Falchion, because if you have good enough gear, a tier 5 boss is pretty easy to kill with a Revenant Falchion, or really any weapon with similar stats to a Shadow Fury. Axe of the Shredded is ideal for DPS, and a Daedalus Axe gives some nice magic find if you have a pet that gives magic find. I would recommend Daedalus Axe for every Slayer except for Vampire and Enderman, because you can't have one in the Rift, and Enderman requires a stronger weapon to kill due to his large health bar. But you can swap to the Daedalus Axe for the final hit to kill the Enderman and still get the magic find. To spawn bosses, just go to the Crypt Ghoul Caves, which is behind Pat's house in the graveyard, and kill ghouls to spawn the boss. You can use a ghoul pet to get 1.5 times combat XP against zombies, which makes spawning fast. This Slayer is very easy to get level 9 because of how much XP tier 5s give, but they also cost a lot of money to spawn, so doing them when Aatrox has his slash prices perk is nice. Wolf Slayer is hated by many due to the long boss spawn times and only one relevant drop. It takes about as long to spawn as a Zombie Slayer, but only goes up to tier 4, so it gives 500 XP instead of 1500, meaning in theory it will take about 3 times longer to max than Zombie. You can spawn the boss in the Howling Cave, but this is highly contested, so some people just choose to do them in the Hub Castle. This boss is easy to kill, so you can just try to maximize your magic find to kill it. You can use a Hound pet to speed up the spawning times from its 1.5% XP boost against wolves. Some people think the Spider Slayer is as difficult to max as Wolf Slayer, but it can be really easy. You can choose to do them in the Spider's Nest, which makes them essentially take the same time to max as Wolf Slayer, but you can also do them on the Crimson Isle. In the burning desert, there are flaming spiders, which actually count towards spawning a spider boss. You can either use a Hyperion or a Fire Veil wand and a cheat mage weapon like an Aurora Staff or Spirit Scepter to max them there. They only take 7 or 8 kills to spawn in the burning desert, and you can also grind nether stars for some money to spend or Kudra keys. A Hyperion makes this so much easier, but you can struggle through with an Aurora Staff and a Fire Veil. Use a Tarantula pet to spawn them faster. Vampire Slayer is also very easy to max. You can just do tier 4s or even tier 3s to get max level, because it maxes at level 5. Just progress through the rift to get better gear to fight them, and then kill the highest tier you can. This boss does have a tier 5 variant, and it can prove to be challenging to defeat. You should defeat at least one tier 5 vampire for the Skyblock XP, but tier 4s aren't too much worse and actually have better loot. Enderman Slayer is one of the hardest slayers in Hypixel Skyblock. You can go down a few different routes to kill a tier 4. You can either use the respective slayer gear to kill them, that being Final Destination in an Atom Split Katana, or use a mix of a Crimson setup or an Aurora setup. If you use Final Destination, you need to get a lot of Enderman kills to gain defense because of the perk on the armor. The buffs it give are good, and Atom Split does good damage as well, but it isn't optimal. I would say it's the easiest way to kill them, but you also need decent magical power and upgrades on your gear to do good bosses. You can also use full Crimson armor or a Warden helmet and 3/4 Crimson armor and an Atom Split Katana for the boss. You need high tiers of armor, at least Burning, and should also have good attributes like Magic Find, Vitality, or Veteran. If you have a lot of money, I believe this is the fastest way to do bosses right now, but again, it is very expensive. You can also use a Hyperion to kill the boss with either Aurora or Final Destination armor, but you do take a lot of damage in Aurora, and there's also nothing you can do if you run out of mana. I use this method to get Enderman Slayer 7 on my other profile, but I can't see myself getting Enderman 9 with it. Hopefully you learned something new from this video, and hopefully you can start work on maxing out your Slayers. Since these are just theories on how to level Slayers the fastest, I will link guides below on how to kill each tier of boss. Another important thing to keep in mind is that you need to just start grinding. It can seem daunting at first to get Slayers like Enderman Slayer to level 9, but if you just keep at it, you'll have them leveled up in no time. With that, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.